What is up? What is going on? It's 2016 and happy Halloween, and this is going to be a Halloween themed sketch. I'm going to be sketching the Frankenstein monsters because my kids just love this stuff. I've got a photo reference here. It is going to be from Basil Gogos, and Basil Gogos is probably one of my all-time favorite commercial artists. Basil Gogos had created art and commercial art from the 1960s, and what he's really famous for is the movie monster posters from way back when. And I gotta tell you, some of those things are just phenomenal. I've got a book, it's an art book called I think The Art of Basil Gogos or something to that effect. It's a definite must-have if you kind of like venturing out into learning different things, whether it's commercial art or whether it is just learning something a little bit new with different techniques. And what's really awesome about Basil Gogos, if you look at some of his paintings, is that everything is just so saturated. He really brought a lot of life to these monsters, and it's just his sense of lighting, and not only that, it's just the exaggeration and the amount of color that he brought to these illustrations and these paintings were just phenomenal. So what I'm doing here is I initially took on some measurements. You can see just on the left hand side here I've got a picture, and I've sort of broken down the image and just looked at measuring. And what I'm doing is I struggle a lot with drawing people, and I'm not a pro at it, but I'm constantly trying to learn and use some of my designerly, I guess, techniques to replicate some of the basic fundamentals in drawing and just applying that to human beings. I have always been fascinated about anatomy and fascinated about drawing likenesses and that sort of thing, and it's something I'd really like to sort of improve on, and this is kind of my venture into doing something like that. So what I'm doing here is just to block out my proportion. So just like we have cars that have specific proportions that need to be met, so do faces. And all I'm doing here is just blocking out the proportions, looking at the photo reference, and just trying to figure out where my ear placement is going to be and where the nose has to be. And all of this is pretty much laid out by just deconstructing the original sketch or the original drawing. Obviously, there's always going to be fundamentals in drawing people. There's a particular proportion that you need to use when you're laying in the eyes and the nose and the mouth, and making sure you sort of indicate all those things lightly and adding that to your drawing, or just adding that to your template. And when you're setting up the drawing, it's really important, because if you don't do all that stuff, it's just going to be completely out of whack, which when you finish a drawing, I'm sure a lot of people had, if you don't start off with a plan that way, then it just makes it less realistic down the road, in addition to just the techniques. Now, the advantages of, and I've talked about this before, is just the sort of the bleed through effect of learning how to draw other things. And if you're a professional, you can kind of take some of those techniques and just port them over to other areas. And that's where it's really enjoyable, when you start to learn the fundamentals of form, learning the fundamentals of just drawing techniques. You can use that for other areas. I'm going to be doing a lot of these actually in the future. I'm just going to start to experiment, say, hey, well, if I can draw some of the other sorts of subjects, whether it's going to be cars or motorcycles, so well, how do I sort of apply that into something that's just as fun, like faces, or trying to do likenesses and that sort of thing. By the way, I have to apologize in advance here. I know that the camera's a little bit shaky because I'm trying to shift everything to my basement, but the table that I was using isn't as solid as I would have liked. So when you put this big structure here to hold your camera and get it perpendicular to your table, then everything has to be really rigid, and apparently it's not for this particular table. So back to the drawing board, pun intended. Back to the drawing board, take it back upstairs to my office, and just start doing things in my office like I usually do. But you know, the problem is that every time I'm in my office, you know, the kids come in and they say, hey, what are you doing? And they're knocking on your door, and they don't like the basement that much, especially when it starts to get cold. Sounds terrible, right? Trying to avoid your kids. I'm not really trying to avoid them. I spend a lot of time with them. Especially when I'm doing drawings. Every time we're doing drawings, I'm doing a lot of drawings for them. I don't know if any of you guys sort of like horror films, but I do remember that I used to really enjoy watching a lot of horror flicks when I was a kid. I used to, in particular, which is really funny because I used to be afraid of them. It was just one of those things that I was daring myself. But I never really liked it, especially even if I was watching something like Freddy Krueger or something like that. But I had this fascination even for some of the old horror films from the 50s, or I don't know if it was 50s or maybe even earlier than that. But all the old horror flicks with Lon Chaney, Vincent Price, movies like The Werewolf and Count Dracula, I used to just love watching all those movies. And I would just sit there being scared to death right after that. Because sometimes my parents would be out and they would be going out for some dinner and I'd be staying at home with my brother. And my brother would, of course, just love to scare me. I'll put on some stupid fake sharp teeth as I'm watching something and hide behind the door and then the bedroom. Of course, I'd freak out. I'll be all mad and want to complain to mom and dad. But that's just how it was. It was, you know, good times. But yeah, I would just enjoy watching horror flicks. And then later I remember one of the other horror flicks, which isn't really a horror, it's more or less a comedy, but if anyone has watched Young Frankenstein, it is, oh man, that movie is going to be, even now, probably one of my all-time favorites. I don't think I would ever, I could ever think of any other movie that made me laugh so much. Which is what, even then, when I first saw Young Frankenstein, I didn't know it was a comedy. I knew nothing about Mel Brooks. I knew nothing about his movies, or maybe I did. I just didn't. I knew that some of his movies were pretty funny, but I didn't know that this particular movie was directed by Mel Brooks. But if anyone has not seen that, definitely check it out. It is one of those movies that's just timeless, and my goodness, Gene Wilder is just. Bless his heart, man. And the guy was just fantastic. Unfortunately, poor guy just passed away. And which, by the way, I've got another sketch that I did of Gene Wilder. So I'm looking forward to actually posting that sometime soon too. Another tribute, I guess, tribute sketch to him. Willy Wonka, the one and only. So I don't know, as you've seen here, you can see that I'm not using any Prismacolor pencils here. I'm actually just using an ebony pencil on a Canson sketch pad. I was hoping the ebony pencil, to be quite honest, was a little bit darker, and it's not as dark as I would have liked. And I think, I'm just wondering, it probably depends on the kind of paper you use it on, maybe. But this was just okay. It wasn't, I expected to get a little bit more value out of it, so I might have to either switch to the charcoal or go back to maybe a Prismacolor pencil and use Prismacolors. Prismacolors, the premieres will give you an excellent value range, so you can really create a high amount of value between your light color and your dark color. So I'm just adding a little bit of texture through here, and all I'm doing is just looking at Basil Gogos techniques on how he's shading up the faces and just adding all these details and scars and anomalies here on his face, on the Frankenstein monster. And I'm using the side of my pencil, another thing. and I just start to define the eyes. And if anyone's seen the old classic Frankenstein, they have that huge head and the eyes looking like it's just partially closed. Such a cool character. Really sweet. And just adding a little bit of detailing here and adding some shadows. But I'll have to say right off the bat, this sketch doesn't look anywhere near as impressive as the master. But you know, it's fun. It's just sort of fun experimenting and learning. Maybe if I draw this 100 times, I'll get it to look somewhat similar. But this is fun though. This was really a lot of fun. Just fun experimenting and doing something different instead of drawing cars all the time. And if you're a product designer, or if you are somebody that is in the design field, I highly encourage that these kind of exercises are arguably good for you. Just doing your particular trade. You do a lot of design work all day, and sometimes it's just nice to bust out the pencil and just do something a little bit different, just to kind of exercise that creativity and then sharpen up your observational skills. And that's what drawing is all about, sharpening up your observation skills. How well are you able to observe details, replicate them, put them on a page, whether that is a vehicle or whether that is a likeness. It's just experimentation. Just going to be adding a little bit more value here. I'm just about wrapping up the drawing, so I'm almost done, or at least as done as I want to be. Just going to add a little bit more shading here to the chin and just define that a little bit more using the side of my pencil. And I think for the next time, I'd like to actually do an acrylic painting maybe of this Frankenstein monster or something like that, similar to experimenting with Basil Gogos techniques, which are pretty sweet. Just adding some value here on the side, using the side of the pencil just to pop out the face a little bit more. So I hope you enjoyed this. I want to wish you all a happy and safe Halloween, and we'll see you here next time on Driven to Draw. Have a good one.